That night, the loyal audience of Real Time with Bill Maher was expecting another episode filled with sharp commentary and scathing critiques of the US political landscape. The talk show, known for its progressive stance and irreverent analysis, usually featured guests who aligned with Maher's views or opponents who knew exactly what they were getting into. But this time, something felt different. Bill Maher walked onto the stage with a slightly mischievous smile, the kind of expression he wore when he knew he was about to provoke a big reaction. He sat down, took a sip from his mug, and began his traditional opening monologue covering the week's headlines. His tone was as biting as ever, sarcastic, sharp, and challenging, and the audience laughed at every well-placed jab. He mocked a Republican candidate's latest interview, criticized the Democrats for their lack of strategy, and poked fun at a new Hollywood controversy. But then, in the middle of it all, Maher paused dramatically. He looked straight into the camera, a provocative gleam in his eye, and made an announcement no one expected. Our special guest tonight is Donald Trump. The studio's reaction was immediate. For a brief second, there was absolute silence, as if the audience was trying to process what they had just heard. Then, an explosion of noise. Some people erupted into enthusiastic applause, while others booed loudly. A murmur spread through the crowd, and the camera captured looks of pure disbelief. Some audience members glanced at each other in shock, while others quickly pulled out their phones to capture the moment. Maher raised his hands, signaling for calm. I know. You didn't see this one coming, did you? But come on, folks, let's be fair. Trump says liberals are afraid to face him. Well, Donald, here I am. Let's see if you can handle it. The crowd responded with more applause and a few nervous chuckles. Everyone in the room knew this night would be unlike any other. The tension in the air thickened as the show's signature music played, announcing the guest's entrance. The cameras panned to the side of the stage, where the unmistakable silhouette of Donald Trump appeared. He stepped out with his usual air of confidence, waving to the audience as if he were at a campaign rally. His crisp blue suit, red tie, and signature golden blonde hair, perfectly styled, made him instantly recognizable. The audience reacted with an even more intense mix of boos and cheers. Trump seemed unfazed. If anything, he appeared to thrive on the polarization. With his characteristic posture, he raised a hand in greeting, and before even sitting down, threw his first jab. Wow, what a warm welcome. Bill, I think your audience loves me more than they love you. The crowd laughed. But Maher, a veteran at handling inflated egos, simply smirked and gestured toward the chair. Well, Donald, let's find out. Their handshake was brief, almost perfunctory, and Trump settled into his seat. Maher leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, while Trump leaned back slightly, clasping his hands together in his lap. The showdown was about to begin. The tension in the studio was palpable. The audience knew they were about to witness something rare on American television, a direct confrontation between two communication giants, each representing an opposite side of the country's cultural and political war. And the best was yet to come. Part 2. The debate heats up. Trump versus Maher. From the very first moments of the interview, it was clear that neither man had any intention of backing down. Maher, despite his sharp wit and years of experience challenging politicians, maintained a controlled, almost casual posture, as if trying to project the image of a man who had everything under control. Trump, on the other hand, sat back in his chair with a confident smirk, exuding the bravado that had defined his public persona for decades. After exchanging a few opening pleasantries, each laced with subtle jabs, Maher wasted no time diving into one of the most contentious issues of recent American history, the 2020 election. Donald, let's start with something simple. Do you still believe you won in 2020? Maher asked, his voice carrying an air of amusement. Trump didn't miss a beat. Bill, it's not a matter of belief. Everyone knows what happened. The system was manipulated. But you know that too. You just can't admit it because you're part of the same corrupt game the left plays. The audience reacted instantly. Some clapped in support, others booed loudly, while a few laughed, as if entertained by the sheer audacity of the statement. Maher raised his eyebrows, shaking his head with a smirk, as if he had been expecting this exact response. "So let me get this straight," Maher continued. "You think there was a massive conspiracy to steal the election, but somehow the courts, many of which were led by conservative judges, just let it happen. Even your own former Attorney General said there was no widespread fraud." Trump leaned forward slightly, his tone taking on a more assertive edge. "Come on, Bill. We're talking about a system that's been broken for years, and let's be honest, a lot of those so-called conservatives you're talking about, they were never really on my side. They're part of the swamp." Maher let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "Ah, yes, the swamp. The mysterious force that somehow includes everyone who has ever disagreed with you. Judges, military officials, members of your own party. Is there anyone left in Washington who isn't in the swamp?" Trump smirked, knowing Maher was trying to corner him. "You know, Bill, the problem with people like you is that you pretend to be so intellectual, but deep down you know the truth. You just don't have the guts to say it." Maher took a sip from his mug, as if to buy himself a second before responding. "The truth? All right, let's talk about the truth, Donald. You were president for 4 years. If the system was so rigged, why didn't you fix it? Why didn't you put all these corrupt people in jail? What stopped you?" Trump leaned back again, a smug expression on his face. "Oh, we were fixing it. But when you have an entire establishment fighting against you, things take time. And frankly, if I had another 4 years, this country would be better off than ever." This time, the audience erupted in mixed reactions, loud applause from his supporters, boos from his critics. Maher let out an exaggerated sigh, throwing his hands up. "Of course, the classic, just give me 4 more years pitch. You do realize every politician says that, right?" Trump shrugged. "Yeah, but the difference is when I say it, it's actually true." The crowd reacted again, and Maher laughed, running a hand through his hair as he looked around as if asking the audience if they were witnessing the same level of absurdity he was. The debate was intensifying, and neither side showed any sign of backing down. The conversation shifted from elections to topics like the economy, immigration, and foreign policy, with Maher pressing Trump on his record, while Trump fired back with his usual attacks on the media, the Democratic Party, and what he called the radical left. Every exchange was a battle of wits, each man trying to land the decisive blow. But as the tension built, it became clear that the night was heading toward a moment that would be talked about for years. The real fireworks were just about to begin. As the interview progressed, the intensity only grew. Maher, ever the provocateur, could feel the debate shifting in his favor, at least in the eyes of the audience that was more sympathetic to his liberal views. But Trump, never one to shy away from a fight, seemed to grow more emboldened with every question Maher asked. The two men were locked in a verbal sparring match, each one sharpening their words with precision. And then came the moment that would define the rest of the night. Maher, sensing that the conversation had reached a boiling point, decided to push Trump in a more personal direction, hoping to rattle him. With a sly grin, he asked a question that many had been waiting for, one that carried with it the weight of 1,000 controversies. "Donald, we both know you've had a lot of failures in your career, from bankruptcies to your failed businesses to your handling of the pandemic. Is there anything you actually regret?" Trump's expression shifted for a brief moment. His confident demeanor flickered as he paused, calculating how to respond. But then, in typical Trump fashion, he snapped back with a retort that had the room buzzing. "I regret nothing. I've had more success in my life than you could ever dream of. What I regret is the fact that the media and the left are so determined to tear me down that they ignore all the great things I've done. You want to talk about my businesses? How about we talk about the thousands of jobs I've created? How about we talk about the economy I built before the pandemic hit?" Maher leaned forward, his voice turning sharper. "But Trump, you were handed a booming economy when you took office. The unemployment rate was at a historic low. You didn't build anything, you just inherited the situation. And when things started to crumble, you weren't able to handle it. You botched the pandemic response and left thousands to die." At this, Trump's face reddened. His hands clenched slightly, and he seemed to tighten up, as though he were bracing himself for an attack. But before Maher could go further, Trump's voice cut through the tension, low and dangerous. "You don't know anything about leadership, Bill. You're a comedian. You make jokes for a..." living. But in times of crisis, people turn to leaders who get things done, not people who sit on the sidelines and criticize. And let me tell you something. I did more for this country in 4 years than you and your liberal friends could ever do. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Maher, his jaw clenched, wasn't about to let Trump off the hook that easily. He fired back without missing a beat. "Oh, so now I'm the problem? That's rich," coming from the guy who couldn't even wear a mask properly, who downplayed the pandemic for months, and who still refuses to take responsibility for the damage it caused. At that moment, something changed. The temperature in the room shifted and the audience's reactions grew louder. Some people were on their feet, applauding Maher's challenge, while others, Trump supporters, sneered and booed, feeling the sting of Maher's sharp criticisms. And then Trump, seemingly unable to contain himself any longer, threw a grenade into the conversation. "Let's get something straight, Bill. The real problem in this country isn't me. It's people like you who pretend to be so woke, so morally superior, but who are really just out of touch with reality. You live in your little bubble, surrounded by your Hollywood friends and your liberal elites, and you don't understand the struggles of real Americans. You've never had to fight for anything." The studio erupted. The energy in the room reached a fever pitch, and the audience was split between those who cheered Trump's words and those who recoiled at his audacity. Maher, always quick on his feet, looked unfazed, but anyone who had been watching could see the cracks beginning to show in his usual unflappable demeanor. He shot back with a cold smile. "Oh, trust me, I get it, Donald. But the difference between us is that I'm not afraid to face the facts. You're the one living in a fantasy world where you think every problem can be solved by screaming louder than the other guy." The back and forth became increasingly heated, and it was clear that the interview had entered a dangerous territory, where personal insults, political ideologies, and media portrayals collided in a way that was both unsettling and captivating. And then, in a moment that shocked everyone, Trump leaned forward and said with a smirk, "You know, Bill, the real mistake I made was agreeing to come on your show. You're not worth my time." Maher's eyes narrowed. The audience gasped, unsure of how this would play out. For a moment, it looked like the interview might descend into chaos, as if Trump were about to storm off the stage. But instead, Maher, ever the seasoned host, raised an eyebrow and responded with one of his signature lines laced with irony. "Well, Donald, you've certainly made an impression. Now, I'd like to get back to reality." The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh, unsure of whether the tension would continue to escalate or if the interview would collapse under the weight of its own intensity. But one thing was certain. This was the moment everyone would be talking about for weeks to come. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely. What began as a typical political debate had spiraled into something much more personal, intense, and unpredictable. As the tension between Maher and Trump simmered down, the remaining moments of the interview were charged with an undeniable energy, a mix of discomfort, disbelief, and anticipation. Maher, ever the professional, leaned back, slightly in his chair, adopting a more neutral tone as he tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. His quick-witted jabs had clearly hit their mark, but it was unclear whether Trump was still willing to engage in any meaningful dialogue. "All right, Donald, let's try something different. Let's talk about the future. What's your plan? For the next presidential race? You're still hinting at a run in 2024. What's the real strategy this time around?" Trump paused for a moment, the brashness in his previous remarks momentarily fading. It seemed like he was taking a moment to regain his composure after the tense exchange. But then, with characteristic confidence, he answered, "The plan? Simple. We're going to make America great again, just like we did before. We're going to focus on the forgotten men and women of this country, the people who have been left behind by the elites and the establishment. And this time, we won't let anyone stand in our way." The audience responded with a loud mix of applause and jeers. Some seemed emboldened by his words, while others looked on with skepticism, wondering if Trump could truly capture the magic of his first campaign again. Maher, unshaken by Trump's response, shot back with his signature irreverence. "That sounds familiar. But if the last 4 years were any indication, you're just going to divide the country even more. What's your plan for healing, Donald? What's your strategy to bring people together? Trump's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. You want unity, Bill. Fine. But the truth is the left doesn't want unity. They want control. They want to erase everything this country stands for and turn it into something unrecognizable. I'll fight for this country. I'll fight for freedom. The room grew more divided by the second. The audience, already polarized, now reflected the broader national division. The conversation had devolved into a fundamental ideological battle, and both men were firmly entrenched in their respective corners. As the interview neared its end, Maher attempted one final challenge, hoping to close the show on a note that would leave the audience with something to reflect on. All right, Donald, you've made your point. But before you go, let's get real for a second. All the talk, all the bravado. What's the legacy you want to leave behind? What do you want people to say about you when you're gone? Trump's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained defiant. I want people to remember me as someone who fought for the people, who didn't back down. I didn't play the game the way they wanted me to, and I didn't care. I did what I thought was best for this country, and that's why people will always remember me. Maher, still skeptical but intrigued by Trump's candid moment, nodded slightly before giving his final remark. Well, Donald, there's no question about it. People will remember you. Maybe not for the reasons you think, but they'll remember. With that, the interview came to an end. Trump stood up, offering a brief nod to Maher before walking off the stage, his presence still, dominating the room even as he left. Maher remained seated, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction, knowing full well that he had just witnessed one of the most extraordinary interviews in the history of real time. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out of the studio, the debate between Maher and Trump would continue to echo in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Clips from the interview would flood social media, fueling endless discussions about the future of American politics and the deepening divide between the left and right. In the days that followed, the interview became a topic of national conversation. Analysts, pundits, and everyday citizens weighed in, dissecting every word, every gesture, every moment of the interview. It became clear that this was not just another celebrity appearance. It was a clash of ideologies, a confrontation between two larger-than-life figures that would reverberate far beyond the confines of a late-night talk show. For Maher, it was a defining moment in his career, one that proved he could hold his own with one of the most controversial figures in American politics. For Trump, it was another moment in his ongoing battle for relevance and power, a reminder that he could still dominate the political conversation, even when facing criticism from the very people who once adored him. And for the American public, it was a stark reminder of just how polarized the nation had become. The interview may have ended, but the divisions it exposed were far from over.